compared to communities which are sitting in oceans of lack of support and all kinds of struggles. That's a very different context. And that's the context that I want to work with you. So let's see then how do we go? Action one that I will say is, we need to begin to do now, what are the opportunities, one action point, what are the opportunities and challenges for ABCD in developing countries and in different contexts of the developing world? I think a little inventory of that would be useful. And of course, if we're going to use the ABCD approach, match that against the resources. What are the assets and resources for doing this work in the developing world? Second point, never confuse what works in the developed world and transplant that to the developing world for one basic reason. There are many. Well, let me put one on the table, and that is the relative macroeconomic stability of the developed world allows you to take local action which works. The macroeconomic instability of the developing world will mean that local success can be wiped out by one stroke of the macroeconomic pen. One devaluation of the currency reverses all the successes we have at the local level. Assets can become relatively less productive in a very different way. So that's the second point. You need to understand that basic difference. Let me move on to tell you another thing about assets. When we say communities have assets, the word have implies some form of ownership or access. And ownership or access, which we take for granted in the developed world, implies some kind of a legal relationship between the owner, community or individual, and that asset. That legal framework hardly exists in many developing countries. So that first point is, when we say have, because it is present, they do not necessarily have it. And therefore, I would argue that we need to begin to understand and support functional property rights systems in which communities really have assets. Not because they're physically present do they have them. Property rights systems. Let me move on to talk a little bit about, if you can't have functional property rights systems unless you have a functional system of access to justice and the rule of law. You wouldn't even believe in the work that we have just done in the Commission on Legal Empowerment of the Poor. Not only are the laws not working for poor communities, there are many laws which are working against the poor. And we got to repeal the anti-poor laws. It's not about anti-poverty laws, which we would love. It's anti-poor laws. It's about getting rid of the poor rather than getting rid of poverty. Let me then move on to, how do you make assets productive? And that's an important issue. The mere inventory of assets will take us no place. Those assets must become productive to improve people's lives. And therefore, business laws, now tell me, why should it take 315 laws, 500 days, and 6 months of the average laborer wages to register a baker shop in Egypt? The laws are not working for poor people. I can go on and give you 1,000 examples, but they're all recorded in this report called Making the Law Work for Everyone, which is on the web, which is the report of the Commission on Legal Empowerment of the Poor. What about labor standards of people who live and work in communities, especially in the informal sector? The Filipina maids who are housemaids, who have no protection or abused constantly. That's a community of people, although not in a physical place. What about bankruptcy laws for poor people? Why is it that when they go bankrupt, they lose their shirt, they lose their children, they lose their family? That's how you get bonded child labor. Why is it that they can't take risks and let their businesses fail and don't have to give up their own lives and their homes, like we, the rich, can do? Why is it that microcredit must cost 35% and above interest rates, and we can get 6 and 7% in the banks? So we have some work to do. What about limited liability corporation protection for micro enterprises in the informal sector? and so on. So I don't have time to give you any more. I've gotten my signal, so let me conclude. But this is not only about asset-based approach to development. It's also about citizen-led development. Well, we take for granted that people are citizens. 1 million Peruvians do not exist legally. They have no registration and no ID. 4 million Venezuelans do not exist legally. In order to get the rights of citizens, in order to lead development by citizens, or for citizens to lead development, they first have to be citizens. And we got that work to do as well. You know, I see a few friends here from Ethiopia. I had a discussion with the Minister of Lands and several others whom I probably shouldn't name. But let me just name the Minister of Lands and Agriculture. And as we had this conversation, I said, Mr. Minister, what kind of an economy are you running? Let's understand this before we can do anything else. Is this a socialist economy or a market economy? And he says, come on now, Naresh, you know, this is a market economy. And I said, all right, but how does land, which is your biggest asset, nobody in Ethiopia can own land. So how do you get that into the market transactions? And he said, well, we have user rights and so on. And it makes sense. In some places, you can have user rights, long-term leases, 99-year leases, 33-year leases, and so on, which can work. Maybe not efficiently. And we got to work with that. And of course, if Mr. Melez says that Ethiopians will only privately own land over my dead body, we got a challenge, right? So we got a lot of work to do, and we have to not take things for granted. Let me conclude. You know I work for CIDA, and many people will tell you when they work for CIDA, that's the last thing they expose, because then you are under attack, right? But we are among friends, so I'll be a bit bold. And let me just conclude by just saying, I will ask you for a few things, and I will, in turn, try to do a few things. I will ask you in closing, can we collect the evidence of how and where ABCD is helping people to get out of poverty, the documented evidence, especially in the developing world, but anywhere else? Governments act on evidence, as you know, or they pretend to. So if we have that evidence, that body of evidence, and maybe it's already available and I'm not aware of it, that's one thing I'm asking you to do and to consider. And if I have an inventory, now with due respect to all our visitors from outside of Canada, if we have an inventory of Canadians engaged in ABCD, that's the second thing, then I will explore and I will see how CIDA can be engaged to make a difference. Thank you.